The one word of warning on 45 nanometer CPUs like the E5300, E7200, E8500, the quad cores, Q9300, Q9400, Q9450, Q9550, and so on, you don't want to exceed 1.4 volts, at least for everyday use. You can maybe go a little bit past it because there's some droop involved there, but you want to stay around that 1.4 volts mark. People have killed their CPUs by going past 1.4 volts, way past 1.4 volts for CPU termination. So keep that in mind. I'm going to change mine back to normal for now. So as you can see here, the only thing I've changed is my V-core from 1.25 to 1.275, and of course my RAM voltage is like I said at the begin with, and you never want to really change your RAM voltage unless you're trying to overclock your RAM, and that's a whole nother story. So the last thing we want to look at here, remember we just changed our host frequency to 400 megahertz. Well, we'll look you down here. Now it just so happens that because I increased that to 400 megahertz, and that's an even number, well looky there, my values actually match. In your case they might not, especially if you have 800 megahertz RAM instead of 1066. You may need to adjust this so that you get 800 megahertz if you have 800 megahertz memory. So remember this. This is going to be the #1 reason why you don't boot, is because you're overlooking this system memory multiplier setting. So I'm going to change mine back to whatever it was to begin with, 2.66D. There's my 1066, which is what my memory is rated at. So now I'm going to escape, and I'm going to save and exit, and hope that I remember my chip well enough that it actually boots without a higher voltage. It's been a long time since I ran it so low, because I normally run it at 3.5 gigahertz. And yep, it's going to boot. So there we are. Successful boot, modest overclock. So I successfully rebooted. I'm going to, of course, hit Control F1 to unlock my hidden settings. And I'm going to go in here. Shoot, what was I going to show you guys? I was going to talk to you guys about something. Oh, multiplier. As you can see up here, we have a CPU clock ratio adjust option. Now for my Q9450, the multiplier is locked at 8 times or below. So if I wanted to, I could lower my multiplier to something like 7x. You can see my CPU speed change there, and then I could change this option, change the CPU host frequency something like 466, and that would theoretically give me some more bandwidth across the bus, assuming that the motherboard can handle it, and assuming that your memory can handle it, which of course, as you see, my memory has changed. So again, I'd have to go back here and find the value that's closest to 1066, which happens to be 932 is what it looks like. Yep. If you want to do that, that's kind of advanced overclocking, and you can certainly lower the multiplier, increase your front side bus. On quad core CPUs, I've seen people hit 500 megahertz with this motherboard. I've seen people exceed 500 megahertz with this board. I personally haven't been able to do it, but I've seen people lower their multiplier and hit 500 megahertz. Now, if you have a dual core CPU, E8500, even the old E6300, which are 65 nanometer parts, you can easily drop this multiplier and then raise your front side bus. On dual core, you can raise the front side bus speed, the host frequency, you can raise it well beyond 500 megahertz. Grant you some extra memory bandwidth, system bandwidth across the bus. Doesn't make that big of a difference, but the option's there for those of you who are advanced enough to use it. Change my speed back to 400. What else was I going to talk to you guys about? I have a Q9450. I've mentioned that already a couple of times. This is a 2.66 gigahertz stock speed processor. It has an 8 times multiplier. The voltage by default is 1.25 volts. So for me, my maximum speed so far, and I'm still tweaking and still trying to get more out of it, has been 3.5 gigahertz. And I'm going to show you my settings here in just a second. Okay, so I told you guys that I was running my Q9450 at 3.5 gigahertz, and this is completely stable, or damn near stable as I've ever seen. You know, I haven't sit here and let Prime 95 run for a week, but I let it run for a couple of days and had some 3D games running, and I've had zero problems. And I encode movies constantly, H.264 movies, and that's a huge stress on the CPU, so I'm definitely very pleased. So as you can see here are my settings for my Q9450 running at 3.5 gigahertz. Which is almost 1 gigahertz over the rated speed of 266. So of course my clock ratio is left at 8 times, and usually with a quad core, you'll end up leaving the multiplier the same. You might lower it down a notch if you get into some advanced Northbridge cooling or something. CPU host frequency is at 438. And if you go down here to system memory multiplier, you can see that I'm actually running my memory at just slightly under its rated speed of 1066. It's actually at 1051. Doesn't make a bit of difference in the world. And actually, when I get to tweaking a little more, I might actually bump up the front side bus just a few notches to squeeze out an even 1066 out of that memory frequency. So, again, there's my memory settings are 55515. Yours will differ depending on your memory. Load line calibration is enabled. There is my CPU V-core, 1.3625. This is the CPU V-core that I needed to get a stable 3.5 gigahertz out of this chip. But you'll also note that I had to increase CPU termination to 1.34 volts, which is normally 1.2. That's a pretty big jump in voltage. Take note that CPU termination is also sometimes referred to as VTT or CPU VTT, the same setting. You should know that 45 nanometer chips seem to respond a lot more to CPU VTT or CPU termination voltage changes than they do to CPU V-core increases. That varies from chip to chip, but it's been my experience that the 45 nanometer quads like a little bump in termination voltage. You can see I've raised my MCH core, which is the North